There's a moment that divides your life into before and after. For me, it wasn't graduating college, getting married, or even having children. It was dying. My name is Hannah Jones. I was, or I should say, I am, an atheist. Or at least I was until that night in February, when everything I thought I knew about reality shattered like glass. I've spent my entire adult life dismissing religion as a crutch for the weak-minded, a fairy tale we tell ourselves to avoid facing the finality of death. I was so certain, so arrogantly, blindly certain. I never expected to be proven wrong on an operating table at St. Mary's Hospital. Let me back up a little. I'm a 34-year-old professor of evolutionary biology at the university. My entire career has been built on empirical evidence, on the scientific method, on what can be observed, tested, and proven. I've published papers debunking religious claims about creation. I've debated theologians on campus. I've been that person at family gatherings who rolls her eyes when someone says, "bless you," after a sneeze. It started with headaches, splitting, vision-blurring migraines that wouldn't respond to medication. Then came the episodes of confusion, the lapses in memory, and finally, the seizure that happened in the middle of my lecture on natural selection. How's that for irony? There I was, explaining how nature weeds out the weak, when my own body betrayed me. The brain scans revealed a tumor the size of a golf ball nestled in my frontal lobe. The doctors were amazed I'd been functioning as well as I had. "We need to operate immediately, doctor," Levinson told me, her face grave as she showed me the scan. "The location is concerning, but we've caught it in time. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow night." My husband, Mark, squeezed my hand. We'd been married for 7 years, and in all that time, I'd never seen him cry. But as Dr. Levinson left the room, I watched the tears slide down his face. "I'll be fine," I told him, with a confidence I didn't feel. "The survival rate is high. I'll be back to arguing with you about whether we should get a dog in no time." The truth was, I was terrified. Not of pain or even disability, but of nothingness. Despite my atheistic convictions, when faced with my own mortality, I found myself haunted by the question, what if there really is nothing after death? No consciousness, no awareness, just an eternal void. It was the first time I understood why humans invented religion in the first place. Death is terrifying when you truly believe it's the end. The night before my surgery, I couldn't sleep. Mark dozed fitfully in the chair beside my hospital bed, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things I might never do again. Would I feel the sun on my face? Would I taste coffee in the morning? Would I see my students graduate? Would I ever know if there was more to existence than this brief flicker of consciousness in an indifferent universe? As they wheeled me into the operating room the next evening, the fluorescent lights harsh overhead, I had the strangest thought. What if I'm wrong about everything? The anesthesiologist smiled down at me. "Count backward from 10, Doctor. Jones. 10, 9, 8. The room began to swim, the faces above me blurring. 7, 6. I never made it to 5. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about reality, consciousness, and the universe itself. First, there was darkness, complete and enveloping. Then, a subtle shift. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. It had texture, movement. I felt myself separating from something heavy and confined. There was no pain, just a sensation of lightness, of burdens falling away like heavy clothes being shed. I was aware in a way I'd never been before, hyper-lucid, intensely present. The darkness transformed into a swirling gray mist. I floated within it, without weight or form, yet somehow more myself than I'd ever been. The thought came with crystal clarity. I'm dead. And strangely, this realization brought no fear, only a profound sense of curiosity. Gradually, the mist began to thin. Pinpoints of light appeared, like stars breaking through clouds. The light grew stronger, more directional. I felt myself being drawn toward it, not physically pulled, but attracted by a force as natural as gravity, yet entirely different. It was like being called home by a voice too deep for hearing. The transition wasn't instantaneous. I remember passing through what seemed like veils or membranes, each one thinner than the last. With each passage, my awareness expanded. Colors began to emerge that I had no earthly names for, hues that existed beyond the visible spectrum I'd known in life. I perceived dimensions unfolding around me that my scientific mind couldn't categorize. Then, abruptly, I was there. The mist dissolved completely, and I found myself standing on a hillside covered in wildflowers that pulsed with an inner radiance. Each petal, each blade of grass seemed alive with consciousness, singing in frequencies I could somehow perceive without ears. The sky above wasn't blue, but a luminous pearl color that shifted and rippled with currents of pure energy. I looked out over a landscape of rolling hills that extended to mountain ranges in the distance. Mountains unlike any on Earth, formed not of rock, but of what appeared to be crystalline structures that refracted light in impossible patterns. Beyond the farthest peaks rose a soft, golden light that felt like the source of everything. My first coherent thought was embarrassingly academic. Fascinating. My dying brain must be flooding with DMT or some other neurochemical. This is a textbook end-of-life hallucination. I felt a detached curiosity, mentally taking notes for a research paper I would never write. But then something happened that shattered my scientific detachment. I felt a wave of something washing over me. To call it love is to drastically undersell the experience. It was as if the concept of love had been confined to a thimble in my earthly life, and now I was experiencing the ocean. This wasn't an emotion. It was a tangible force, a living energy that permeated everything. It flowed into me, through me, around me, seeing every dark corner of my being, every shameful thought, every failure and fear, and embracing it all with complete acceptance. I felt known, truly known, for the first time in my existence. There was nowhere to hide, and astonishingly, no desire to hide. I realized then that I had a form in this place, not my physical body, but something that contained my essence. Looking down, I saw what resembled hands, but they were composed of light with subtle colorations that shifted with my thoughts. I wasn't wearing clothes exactly, but was draped in what seemed to be living light that moved and flowed with my consciousness. As I stood absorbing this impossible reality, I sensed presences approaching. Turning, I saw two figures walking toward me across the meadow. Their forms were human-like, but perfected, radiating light from within. As they drew closer, recognition hit me with the force of revelation. My grandparents, my father's parents, who had passed away during my college years. Not as they were in their final days, ravaged by cancer and dementia, but as they existed in their prime, yet somehow more. Grandma Ruth's face held the wisdom of ages, and Grandpa Joseph's eyes sparkled with a vitality that transcended anything I'd seen in life. "Hannah," my grandmother said, and her voice wasn't a sound, but a vibration that resonated through my entire being. "We've been waiting for you, sweetheart." "This isn't possible," I said, or rather, thought. Communication here seemed to happen on multiple levels simultaneously. "You're dead. This must be a hallucination." My grandfather's laugh wasn't mocking but gentle. "Always the scientist, our Hannah. Always needing evidence." He reached out and took my hand. The touch was more real, more solid than any physical contact I'd experienced in life. There was a transfer of information, memory, love. I can't adequately describe it, but in that touch, I felt his essence, his humor, his integrity, his unconditional love for me. "You're really here," I whispered, astonishment flooding through me. "You're really you." "We are," my grandmother confirmed, taking my other hand. "And you're really you, Hannah. More you than you've ever been." "But how? I don't understand. There's no scientific explanation for consciousness surviving bodily death. The mind is just the brain. When the brain dies..." "The mind is not just the brain," my grandfather said gently. "The brain is a receiver, Hannah, not the source. It's like a television set. When it breaks, the broadcast doesn't stop existing." As he spoke, I became aware that I could perceive his thoughts forming before he expressed them. Not in words exactly, but in packets of pure meaning. And more startling still, I could sense the vast web of connections between us. Not just familial bonds, but intricate patterns of energy and intention that linked us across what I had thought was the ultimate barrier: death itself. "Where are we?" I asked, looking around at the impossible landscape that seemed to respond to our presence. Flowers turning toward us, the very air vibrating with recognition. "This is what some might call a way station," my grandmother explained. "A place of transition. It exists partly as a comfort to souls newly freed from physical bodies. What you're seeing is shaped partly by your expectations and partly by the true nature of this realm. So it's not heaven?" The word felt strange in my consciousness after years of dismissing it as mythology. My grandfather smiled. "Think of it as the foothills. The real destination lies ahead." He gestured toward the distant golden light beyond the crystal mountains. "There's someone waiting to meet you," my grandmother said, a knowing look passing between her and my grandfather. "Who?" I asked, though something deep within me already knew the answer. "The one you've spent your life denying," my grandfather said without judgment. "The source." Fear swept through me then. Not fear of punishment or retribution, but a profound sense of my own arrogance, my own willful blindness. What would happen when a lifelong atheist encountered the divine reality she had ridiculed? My grandmother sensed my apprehension. "Don't be afraid, Hannah. Love doesn't keep score of wrongs. There is only joy at your homecoming." They led me across the meadow, toward a path that hadn't been visible before. As we walked, I noticed that the landscape was becoming increasingly vivid, as if we were moving from a beautiful painting into the reality that inspired it. Flowers not only turned to follow our path, but seemed to bow in reverence. The ground beneath us felt responsive, almost conscious. "How long have I been gone?" I asked, suddenly worried about Mark, about the operating room I'd left behind. "Time doesn't work the same way here," my grandmother explained. "What feels like minutes to you might be seconds there, or hours. It flows differently." As we crested a hill, I saw something that took my breath away, or would have, if breathing were still necessary. Before us sprawled a vast city unlike anything on Earth. Its structures weren't built so much as grown, towers of living crystal and light rising organically from foundations that seemed to pulse with energy. The entire city shimmered with an inner radiance, colors flowing through its structures like blood through veins. Surrounding the city was what appeared to be water, but it moved with purpose and intelligence, rippling in patterns too complex to be natural currents. The water itself seemed alive, conscious. "What is that?" I whispered in awe. "One of the many dwelling places prepared for those who love him," my grandfather said, the words stirring distant memories of Sunday school, verses I'd long dismissed. As we approached the outskirts of the luminous city, I began to hear music. Though "hear" isn't quite right. The music wasn't entering through ears, but permeating my entire being. It wasn't a single melody, but countless harmonies interwoven in perfect mathematical precision, creating something so beautiful that it brought tears to my eyes, or the spiritual equivalent of tears, as I no longer had a physical body to cry with. The music contained everything: joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, all perfectly balanced, all part of a greater whole. I recognized that this was the music of existence itself, the underlying harmonic structure of reality that scientists glimpse in equations and artists capture in moments of inspiration. We passed through what appeared to be an entranceway in the crystalline wall surrounding the city. Not gates exactly, but an opening that responded to our approach, expanding to welcome us. Inside, the city was even more astonishing. Beings of light moved about in what seemed like joyful purpose. Some had forms similar to human bodies, others were entirely different, patterns of energy and light that nonetheless conveyed distinct personalities. In the center of an open plaza stood a figure that drew my attention immediately. Unlike the others, this presence was so luminous that I initially couldn't look directly at it. The light wasn't blinding in a painful way, but overwhelming in its intensity and purity. As I watched, the light modulated itself, becoming more focused, more defined, until I could perceive a form within it, the figure of a man, yet infinitely more. He radiated authority and power beyond comprehension, yet also infinite tenderness. His face held both ancient wisdom and youthful joy. His eyes, I can't describe their color because they contained all colors, all possibilities. I knew with absolute certainty that I was in the presence of Jesus Christ. My grandparents stepped back respectfully as he approached me. Each step he took seemed to ripple through the fabric of reality around us, as if the very substance of this place responded to his movement. "Hannah," he said, and my name in his voice was like hearing it for the first time, as if he was speaking not just my name but my true identity, the essence of who I was created to be. I couldn't speak. All my years of skepticism, all my scientific certainties, all my clever arguments against faith, they seemed not just wrong but utterly irrelevant in his presence. I felt naked, exposed, all my intellectual defenses stripped away. Strangest of all, I felt known, completely, utterly known, and still loved. The love emanating from him was not abstract but personal, directed specifically at me with an intensity that would have been unbearable if it hadn't also brought healing. "Lord," I finally managed, the words strange on my lips, but somehow perfect. "I didn't believe in you. I argued against you. I mocked those who followed you." His smile was like the dawn breaking after the longest night. "I know, Hannah. I was there, listening, loving you through it all." I looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "How can you welcome me? I've spent my life turning people away from you." He moved closer and gently lifted my chin with a touch that sent waves of compassion through me. "Because you are mine," he said simply. "Because before you were formed, I knew you. Because my love for you doesn't depend on your belief in me." I saw then that his hands bore marks, scars that somehow radiated not pain, but triumph. When I looked more closely at him, I could see that his entire being contained this paradox: tremendous suffering transformed into immeasurable love. "Would you like to understand?" he asked, extending his scarred hand to me. "Not as you've theorized, but as it truly is." Trembling, I placed my hand in his. "Yes, please show me." The moment our hands touched, reality expanded. I wasn't just seeing with spiritual eyes, but perceiving with my entire being. The universe, or multiverse, opened before me like a living book. I witnessed creation not as a single event, but as an ongoing process of divine imagination and love. The Big Bang wasn't the random explosion I'd taught in my classes, but the first chord in a symphony of intentional creation. I saw how quantum fields responded to consciousness, how the observer effect wasn't just a quirk of physics, but evidence of the fundamental relationship between mind and matter. I saw how evolution wasn't a godless process, but a divine method. Life exploring endless possibilities within loving parameters. The complexity of DNA wasn't random, but linguistic, a communication system designed to allow endless creativity within consistent structures. Most humbling, I saw my own life from a perspective outside of time. I saw moments when divine guidance had been offered to me, through synchronicities I'd dismissed as coincidence, through people whose wisdom I'd ignored, through that subtle inner voice I'd attributed to simple intuition. I saw how even my career in science had been part of a larger purpose, how questions that led me to deny God had actually been preparing me for a deeper understanding of His methods. I saw the impact of my teachings, not just the information I'd imparted, but the spiritual influence I'd had on young minds. Some students had been strengthened in ways I hadn't intended, finding in the elegance of natural laws a pathway to deeper wonder. Others had been led further from understanding the full picture of reality. The weight of that responsibility would have crushed me, if not for the love still flowing from Jesus' touch. I was so wrong, I whispered. So blind. And yet, here you are, he said, his voice gentle. Seeing now. As he spoke, I became aware of another presence. Vast, infinite, encompassing everything I was perceiving, and infinitely more. Not a figure or form, but pure being itself, the ground of all existence. I understood that I was experiencing the presence of God the Father, not as separate from Jesus, but as the source from which He extended. This presence was both utterly transcendent, beyond all human categories and understanding, and shockingly intimate, closer to me than my own thoughts. And the love flowing from this infinite source toward me was personal, specific, intentional. In a moment of clarity that transcended all my years of study, I understood the Trinity not as a theological puzzle, but as a living reality, God existing in eternal relationship, a community of love so perfect and complete that it formed a single being while remaining distinct persons. Hannah, Jesus said, drawing my focus back to Him, you've seen much, but your time here is not yet complete. What do you mean? I asked, suddenly apprehensive. You're being given a choice, he explained. You can remain here now, or you can return to your life on earth for a time. The thought of returning to the limitations of physical existence after experiencing this reality was almost unbearable. Why would I go back? I asked. Because there is work yet for you to do, he said. A testimony to bear. People who need to hear what you've experienced. No one will believe me, I protested. The scientific community will say it was just brain chemistry, hallucinations from oxygen deprivation. I would have said the same. Jesus smiled. Some will dismiss your words, yes, but others have been prepared to hear them. Seeds will be planted, and your own understanding of science, of consciousness, of reality, has been transformed. You can now help bridge worlds that should never have been separated. I felt torn. The thought of leaving this place of perfect peace and love was painful, yet I sensed the truth in his words. I had been given a glimpse of what lay behind the veil of material existence, and that knowledge came with responsibility. The choice is yours, Jesus said, but know that if you return, I will be with you. The separation you've felt throughout your life was never real, only unrecognized. Before I could respond, I felt a subtle pull, a tether I hadn't been aware of being gently tugged. The luminous city, my grandparents, Jesus himself, they didn't exactly recede, but a veil seemed to be falling between us. Wait, I called out, suddenly desperate. I have so many questions still. And they will be answered in time, Jesus assured me, his voice somehow clear despite the growing distance. Remember what you've seen, Hannah. It's more real than what you've called reality. My grandmother stepped forward quickly. We'll be waiting for you when it's truly your time, dear one. But don't rush. Live fully. Share what you've learned. Your story is just beginning, my grandfather added with the smile I'd missed for so many years. The pull grew stronger. There was a sensation of moving backward at tremendous speed, through layers of existence. The brilliant light dimmed. The music faded. That perfect love seemed to grow more distant, though I could still feel its echo within me. Then came a violent transition, jarring like being plunged into ice water, followed by pain. So much pain. I gasped, my lungs burning as they inflated. My eyes flew open to blinding surgical lights and the beeping of machines. Voices shouted around me. "She's back!" BP stabilizing, heart rate normalizing. Dr. Levinson's face appeared above me, her surgical mask pulled down, eyes wide with shock and relief. "Hannah, can you hear me? We lost you. You were clinically dead for 16 minutes and 14 seconds. We were about to call it." 16 minutes. A mere moment in the timelessness I'd experienced. I tried to speak, to tell them what had happened, but my throat was blocked by a breathing tube. I made an urgent noise, my hand reaching up only to be gently restrained by a nurse. "Don't try to talk," she soothed. "You're intubated. We'll remove that soon, once you're stable." Frustration welled up in me. I had to communicate what I'd seen, what I now knew. I gestured frantically for something to write with. Understanding, the nurse brought a small whiteboard and marker. My hand trembled as I wrote 4 words. "Heaven is real. God exists." Dr. Levinson read it and exchanged a glance with the anesthesiologist, a look I recognized all too well. It was the same look I'd given to students who'd tried to talk to me about spiritual experiences, a mixture of pity and clinical detachment. They thought I was confused from trauma, from oxygen deprivation to my brain. I underlined my message 3 times, pointing emphatically. "We understand you've had a powerful experience, Hannah," Dr. Levinson said in the calm, patronizing tone doctors use for distressed patients. "Right now, we need to focus on stabilizing you. Your husband is waiting. Would you like to see him?" I nodded, understanding their skepticism, but knowing what I had experienced transcended their medical frameworks. When Mark rushed in, his face pale with fear and relief, I wrote a new message. "I died. Saw Grandma and Grandpa. Saw Jesus. It's all true." To my surprise, Mark didn't dismiss my words as the medical team had. Instead, tears filled his eyes. "I prayed, Hannah," he whispered. "While they were working on you, while they were trying to restart your heart, I prayed. I've never prayed before in my life, but I begged God not to take you. And now you're telling me..." I nodded vigorously, gratitude flooding through me that at least one person might believe me. In the days that followed, as I recovered from both the surgery and my brief death, I pieced together what had happened medically. During the procedure to remove the tumor, I had suffered a severe reaction to the anesthesia, leading to cardiac arrest. For 16 minutes and 14 seconds, my heart had been still. By all medical understanding, my brain should have suffered irreversible damage after being deprived of oxygen for so long. But when they performed follow-up scans, they found not only no brain damage, but also no trace of the tumor that had been only partially removed when I coded. The medical team called it a miracle, though most of them meant it as a figure of speech rather than a literal divine intervention. They had no explanation for how I could have been clinically dead for so long, and returned with my cognitive functions not just intact, but seemingly enhanced. As soon as the breathing tube was removed, I began telling Mark everything. The initial darkness, the separation from my body, the realm of light, my grandparents, the luminous city, Jesus, the Father, the visions of creation and my own life. I told him things about my grandparents that I couldn't have known, details they shared with me during our walk. I described the music I'd heard, the colors I'd seen that don't exist on Earth. "It wasn't a hallucination, Mark," I insisted. It was more real than this hospital room, more real than anything I've ever experienced, and everything I've believed, everything I've taught. It wasn't exactly wrong, but it was so incomplete, like trying to understand the ocean by studying a single drop of water. Mark listened, really listened, and something in my story reached him because he started attending church while I was still recovering in the hospital. He brought me books about near-death experiences similar to mine, about quantum physics and consciousness, about the historical evidence for the resurrection. As I read these accounts, I was struck by the similarities to my own experience. People from different times, different cultures, different religious backgrounds, or none at all, describing the same elements: the tunnel or void, the light, the overwhelming love, the life review, the reluctance to return. The consistency was striking, especially from a scientific perspective.